Welcome to Revisiting the Vault, a podcast where we're looking at the history of art, animation, music, and just about everything else, but through a Disney lens. I am Mary Ratliff. I am a writer, filmmaker, visual artist, and lover of all things film.
And I am Gretchen Harwell. I'm vet tech, historical fashion enthusiast, but not expert, parent, adult human being. I think in this movie's case, I get the primary qualification is vet tech.
Yep. So that brings us into, I wanted to have a small errata on our last episode.
Yes.
I just wanted to comment so that it was on the record that after our last episode on Peter Pan, which, again, spoiler alert, we did not enjoy at all. So if you liked Peter Pan, please do not go back and listen to that one. I don't want to ruin your childhood. I did go back and look a little bit more about J.M. Barrie, his life. He's a pretty mixed bag. He was very famous in his time. He was hanging out in literary circles. He did have a lot of literary friends, very big names that you would recognize. But I did also look up more of how the Native Americans were treated in the original play and the original book, and it is worse than the movie.
Which is nuts. Although, honestly, I have to say, based on what you see in the movie, you kind of, maybe it's just me looking back at it, but I kind of can buy it. If they were willing to go that far in the movie, yep, I believe it.
Once you start looking at it, I mean, it is absolutely to the bones a British colonialist view.
Exactly.
It's just so deep, and I'm not going to get into any of the specifics actually on here because they are all offensive, and I just don't want to. So that's my slight correction. If anybody actually did listen to our Peter Pan episode and they're just like, well, in the play, I'm going to go ahead and tell you now, the play was worse. So watch Hook instead. But that also brings us to the actual subject of this week's episode. We are watching all of the Disney animated theatrical releases in chronological order, and we have moved up to 1955, which is Lady and the Tramp.
Yay!
Released originally in June of 1955, re-released in theaters twice in the 80s, and then on VHS in 1987, which means that people our age probably have quite a few childhood memories of this film, because it does seem like it was one of the earliest ones to come out on VHS. It's a film that, I'm trying to figure out, I was thinking that we haven't done like a historical context thing in like a hot minute. And so I was like, what do we want to say about 1955? 1955 in film, Some Like It Hot came out. And there are quite a few classics, sort of that caliber that are coming out. We are firmly in the 50s. We are firmly in the baby boom. We are firmly in that like Leave It to Beaver, June Cleaver household. All of those things when this movie comes out. Although, what will become important, I am sure, in this context, because we will talk about it, is one of the major historical events that happened in 1955 in the film industry is that James Dean died in a car accident in September 1955. James Dean died in the height of his fame.
Right.
When you're thinking of like that James Dean greaser era of film...
This is it, yes.
This is it. This is where we are. The film takes place in 1909. I had to look that up. Honestly, plot, music, characterization, everything about this movie feels 50s.
It does. The costuming, it's all drawn, but you get the idea. All of the clothing is decidedly Edwardian, right down to the little button-up spats over the shoes and all of the stuff. That being said, yes, it is, and that was actually one of my things, and we will discuss it, but it is a movie that to me feels extremely dated. And some of it is because there's so many things that are just so 50s about it.
Right. The best of the Disney films. Going back to the one so far that we both raved about, Cinderella. And part of it is because Cinderella takes place in a time period that feels completely foreign to us.
Right.
But it's timeless. It feels timeless. And Lady and the Tramp is not timeless, and it does not feel timeless. No. It feels of its time.
Yep.
And I think that hampers it quite a lot. As much as I am not, this is not Peter Pan. This is not, if you love Lady and the Tramp, stop listening. It's not that bad. And it feels like you have to go into watching it with with the feeling that you can't expect too much of these people because they aren't going to deliver. And these people being the film's creators.
Right.
This is I actually don't think I put this in our sort of summary of the things that we probably want to mention, but one of the things for me is that the plot of the film, more or less, is good girl falls for bad boy.
Yeah.
It's the nice little, like, she's literally called Lady.
Yes.
She is a purebred, perfect little dog with her collar and her ears that fall like perfectly coiffed hair and all of this.
This is Uptown Girl by Billy Joel.
Right, exactly. She just ends up accidentally on the streets and she meets this tramp, like literally a tramp.
Yeah.
And she falls for his ways. That is such a 1950s story. And it's not a story I hate. I am not one of those people that's like, ugh. I don't, actually. And I think that of the ways to handle that story, this one is actually one of the better ways to do it. Because in the end, and if this is the first time you're tuning in, we do not talk about these things in chronological order of what happens in the movie. Right. And we spoil the end very upfront.
Spoiler alert.
Right. In the end, you know, you've got this whole movie where he's trying to convince her that being, footloose and collar free is the way to go. Dogs don't need humans. You shouldn't be tied down. Like, he said something about, I have all of these families, but none of them have me.
Right.
That is a strong statement for an animated movie about dogs. But in the end, she's in distress, and she's clearly upset because she sees the rat going in the window. And he comes back after she said, like, get out of my life. I want nothing to do with you. And he's like, okay, I'll leave.
Yeah.
But he comes back. He saves the day. Poorly. But he does.
Right.
And then he gets adopted. He agrees to get adopted, and he settles down to a family life. Like, literally a family life. They have puppies.
Yes, but you also kind of have to question, and I am reading too much into this. This is a movie about two dogs.
I know.
Did he settle down because he wants to be with Lady? Because there is that whole theme. Well, it's just not going through the whole movie, but it's going through the last 25 minutes or so.
Right.
Or does he settle down? Is it to be with Lady, or is it to be with the family? Does he see the light about being in a family? My question is, okay, is all of that bravado, and really he wishes he had a family, but he doesn't, and so he's like, no, it's better this way, I'm free? Or is he really that way, and then he's like, well, maybe having a family isn't so bad?
Maybe he secretly wanted it all along.
Yeah, or is it like, well, I don't really want a family, but I really want to be with Lady.
Right, because I'm thinking about some of the other stories that I've seen with this sort of plot line. One of them that came to mind when I was thinking about it is a manga called Mars that, unless you were really into manga in the early 2000s, you wouldn't know. And there is a lot of times it does end up being that the bad boy who's acting like he doesn't want to settle down and he doesn't need to be tied down to anything really secretly has always wanted some attachments all along and just is like dealing with trauma because men can't go to therapy.
Right.
But at the same time, like in the 50s, I don't think that they had even scratched the surface of thinking about what these tropes actually meant.
No, yeah, I think you're exactly right. And also, it is based on a story. And so it's not even necessarily Disney.
And it was published in Cosmopolitan magazine, of all places.
Obviously.
I did not manage to track down that story.
I don't know that we need to.
One of the things I read was that they started in the 30s working on trying to make a story out of a dog named Lady, because animator Joe Grant had an English Cocker Spaniel named Lady, and he would draw pictures of her, and they thought that it would make a cute movie, but they weren't finding the storyline. And then they read this short story, and Walt Disney decided that this perfect little lady should fall in love with this, like, bad dog from the streets. So I don't know if this story has that element, or if it's just like a day in the life of Tramp. Question mark.
Right.
It is very much like that story was everywhere. I don't necessarily have a problem with that part of it. I do have an issue with the whole, he's had so many girlfriends.
I have a problem with that too. Let's get into that part, because I did want to discuss that.
Yeah.
What we're referencing is there's a scene where Peg the Pekingese,
Lady's in the clink. She's in the lockup.
She sings He's a Tramp. And I put down, am I the only one finding this off-putting? This dog, she's a Pekingese, and she's very fluffy, and she's she's drawn with hips. And again, this is one of those weird things that we keep seeing with Disney stuff where they kind of, not really anthropomorphize, but kind of in their drawing of an animal to make it a sexy lady. It's the same way the rabbits and Bambi have boobs and stuff. And it's just kind of weird. She kind of strikes me as kind of like she used to be this hot lounge singer.
Yeah, they're trying to do this, like, they say she's from the Dog and Pony Show, which would have been a vaudeville act set in 1909, so that really would have been that era.
It's kind of like burlesque-y in her, but it's not like striptease burlesque, it's just weird.
It's reminding me of Gypsy Rose Lee.
Yes.
And I know it's because they hired Peggy Lee to play the part. I mean, it's just that scene feels like, we've got Peggy Lee, we're going to do this with her.
The song she sings is like, he's a tramp, and she lists off all these other girlfriends he's had, and they're in the pound, and all these other dogs are like, oh, and he was with so-and-so, and he was with so-and-so, and here's Lady, you can tell, feeling like, oh my God, I felt like I was special. And clearly, on just one more notch in his belt kind of thing, like, she kind of has that vibe, and I'm like, this is disgusting, because they are dogs.
Right.
I'm not even going to get into the whole, like, dogs don't think that way sort of thing. Like, dogs act on instinct. As much as we wish otherwise, they do. They make this dog sing this song, and she's wagging her butt at the camera, or at the screen, at the viewer, at whatever. And it's like she's got hips, and I just feel like this whole movie to me felt very dated in a way that I really can't put my finger on. There are sexist attitudes. We've already seen that. There are racist attitudes galore in this one. We've seen that. There's a very dated attitude toward animals in this one, and I think that might be part of it with me. There's something about this whole movie that the whole time I was watching it, I was just kind of like, ugh. Not, the racism is very off-putting, I will say that, but it's not like the whole movie screams offensive the way Peter Pan did. It's not like that.
Right.
This scene where Peg the Pekingese is singing about, you can't tie him down. He's going to love everybody, baby. And, you know, and she's like, and I still kind of love him too. And it's just like, I don't know.
Right. Take Peg and just sort of put it over in a box for a second. All of the things in this movie, you know, the racism, the sexist attitudes, all of that stuff, it's actually not bad for its time. And that's one of those things it's really tricky to say, because people love to make that excuse for things that are offensive and were offensive.
And the thing is, like, racism wasn't okay then. It was just socially accepted.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that I don't want to necessarily judge this movie from a modern lens in a they should have known better,
right.
that it was any sort of malicious intent. Like, I don't think that there was any malicious intent on any of this. I think that they just thought it was funny.
Yes, exactly.
Because those were the kinds of things that people thought were funny, because society was racist.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right.
That being said, the whole thing of the good girl falls for the bad boy, and the bad boy just needs to be tamed. So this is why I mentioned James Dean. Mm-hmm. And the fact that this is the James Dean era. That was his appeal.
Yeah.
That was why all of these women were so in love with him, was this idea of the bad boy in the motorcycle jacket who races fast cars, but, like, if he fell in love with me, I could tame him.
Right.
I would still have that, like, slice of danger from my ordinary suburban housewife life, but he would settle down with me.
Right.
That was the appeal of James Dean as an actor to society. Not necessarily in his movies, that's not necessarily the parts that he was playing, but that was his sort of character that he was in the tabloids and in the movie magazines and stuff. And so the fact that this movie is playing that trope in 1955, the year when he was the most famous that he had been, I'm not surprised at all. And like I said, I'm not even that mad at it. The thing that I'm mad at, and that I know is part of how these stories were told in the 50s, it makes me want to beat my head against a wall because of the bad things that it tells little girls and young women.
Yeah.
Of this thing of, he's had girlfriends, and I thought I was special, because I haven't had any boyfriends, so he was special to me.
Right.
When he's made no illusions. He has made no pretensions, no promises, nothing. He's not said, you're the only girl I've ever loved. He's not said any of that. It's just an assumption, because people didn't talk about these things. And also, the whole thing is based in this idea that women are supposed to stay virginal and perfect ladies.
Yes.
And men have their wild years before they settle down. That, to me, I hate that. Like, I hate that part of it. I hate that that's why she gets upset, when she should be upset about the fact that he led her knowingly into a dangerous situation where they could get in trouble, did not fully tell her what could happen, and then it's not like he intentionally abandoned her.
No.
He just was running faster than her, and he did come back very quickly.
Yeah, but she's clearly terrified the whole time.
She does not want to chase those chickens. She wants nothing to do with that. Tramp, what are you doing? She can be mad about that.
He's kind of a jerk the whole time. Like, the first time they meet, she's talking to Jock and Trusty, and we can get into the dog breeds in just a moment. But she's talking to them, and she's talking about how her people, they're treating her weird. She doesn't know what's going on. Jock and Trusty are like, oh, Darling is pregnant. And he kind of shows up, and he's just sort of an a-hole about it.
He just butts into a private conversation.
Yeah, he walks into a private conversation, and he's kind of making fun of her. But not really making fun of her. He's just like, oh, well, and then this is going to happen. And Jock and Trusty are trying to be, honestly, they're pretty likable characters. They're trying to be like, oh, but a baby is wonderful, and like, yada, yada, yada. And he comes in, he's like, nope, they're jerks. They're humans, they're going to abandon you, and blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, what the hell?
Yeah.
So from there, I'm like, I thought Tramp was supposed to be likable, because again, I had not seen this movie. I don't have childhood nostalgia for this movie. And so I'm watching it, I'm like, why on earth would she fall in love with him? And it goes back to what you said. This is like this classic rebel without a cause time period, and nope, not into it.
That's the trope of the good girl falling for the bad boy, generally, is their first meeting, he's an asshole.
Yeah.
Specifically to her, usually.
Yeah.
And then for whatever reason, they have their second meeting, and in their second meeting, he does something, like for some reason, she sees the heart of gold under the exterior. The hint of the heart of gold. Usually that's the way it happens.
And I will say, honestly, when we first see Tramp, he's going around and he sees the puppies in the pet store window. Don't buy a dog from a pet store. We don't need to go on a tangent about it, but don't do it.
Yeah.
That being said, he sees all the puppies. He's like, oh, look at the babies. And he's being very sweet. And so he's not, as a viewer, he's not just a jerk. But then he goes and he meets her, and it's just like, what the hell, dude? He's just kind of a jerk. I don't know.
In these stories, in the 50s, I'm not going to say that this is like a straight line or a one-to-one comparison or that one thing, that this is where this was born or whatever. But watching it now reminds me of negging, which is a pickup artist thing where if you see a girl that you want to pick up, you go over and the first thing you do is insult her.
Yeah.
And like try to tear her down a little bit so that then when you build her up, she'll like you more, which is just, we're not a relationship podcast, but...
Wait, we're not? Crap. We're not a vet podcast. We're not a relationship podcast. We're a fashion podcast.
I know, like what?
Okay, yes. No, you're right. You're right. No, but no, you're exactly right. That's what he does.
We're technically not a parenting podcast either, but yeah, no, it is. And it, like I said, I'm not following that as a one-to-one. I'm not calling Tramp a pickup artist. It's just that the attitudes of the time were so ingrained with so much sexism and so much gender performance of women are this way and boys are this way. And also class distinctions.
He calls the area she lives in Top Hill. And he calls them what, like the leash and collar set or something like that?
Right. Because they're very upper middle class.
Yeah.
This town that they're in is not named, but it is based on, I want to say it's Marceline, Missouri, which is where Walt Disney grew up. It's based on his Midwest small town. And so if you think about that house that Jim Deere and Darling live in, they have money.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, he went to Yale.
Good point. So, so, like, these people are upper class. And so she is, like you said, it's Billy Joel. It's Uptown Girl. She is the well-bred.
Yes, literally. Literally well-bred. Yeah. And I will actually say, we've heard Peg's song about him. And he's kind of negative. He kind of is a pickup artist in a way. If you didn't have the other bits where he does go and see those puppies and he is kind of sweet about it. And then, he sort of takes her on a tour.
Well, and he rescues his friends from the dog catcher's cart.
Peg among them. Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. He is a more well-rounded character than some of this stuff implies.
Yeah.
But that being said, the short version of this is he's a jerk when they first meet.
Right. It's one of those where I'm like, this is not #relationship goals, guys. I mean, maybe it ends up that way. And again, it is the kind of thing where, like, you really have to go into it being like, I'm about to watch a 1950s romance movie.
About dogs.
But about dogs. And it's going to have just some weird sexism in it. Because, they have this whole thing, and they make it kind of montagey, where, like, they stay out all night.
Yeah.
I wrote in my notes, I was like, she was out all night with a boy.
Pearl clutching.
If this was a movie about humans in the 1950s, that would have been the most shocker of a shocking scene. It probably wouldn't have been allowed.
Think about the song Wake Up Little Susie. They fell asleep in a movie theater and they're like, oh my gosh, it's late. We're going to be in deep shit.
Yeah. That montagey bit where they're staying out all night, he is being romantic in a very stereotypical way that, like, she is... I wrote that she's so sheltered because she really, like, he barely has to make an effort, but he does make an effort.
Right.
My thing is, it's not his fault she didn't realize that he'd had girlfriends before.
Sure.
Well, and here's the other thing is I read that, and I don't know if it's the novelization. Apparently they put out the novelization for this movie like years before it came out because they wanted people to know the story before they came to the movie, which is like, when you think about how Marvel does things now where they like literally don't even give the actors the whole script, that's really different. But I don't know if it was that novelization or later children's books, like the little golden books or whatever, but they take out that subplot entirely.
Yeah.
They just don't do it. And it's because the stated reason that I read is it was too grown up. It was out of place for a children's book. And I'm like, then maybe it was out of place for this movie.
Well, and that makes me think they took it out later.
I think it probably wasn't the original. That part of it I did not like.
No, I didn't.
Like I said, I'm okay with sort of the trajectory of their relationship because I do think that he displays a few good behaviors that in movies with real people they wouldn't have done. I was very impressed when he makes his offer where he's like, see that whole world out there where two dogs could make it on their own and it would be wonderful. You should come with me. And she says, but then who would look after the baby? And he's like, okay, I'll take you home. Now then he does take her to go chase chickens on the way home because he can't let go just yet. But he immediately is like, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
And there's no needling. There's no trying to convince.
He doesn't act immature or resentful. He just is like, yes.
He's like, okay, this is what you want.
I'm with you there. Can we talk about their date for just 1 second? Let's just get the vet tech and me out just for a moment.
The famous spaghetti scene.
Oh, God. Don't feed your dogs spaghetti and meatballs. Those two dogs are going to have diarrhea. End of discussion.
They give Lady a donut and coffee.
Yeah, don't do that either.
I don't know if giving dogs coffee is remotely safe.
No, it's not. Don't do it. Just don't. Caffeine is not good for them. Do not give your dogs donuts, coffee, or spaghetti and meatballs. Period. Just don't. Bad idea.
Yeah, I 100% understand how that scene became iconic.
Of course.
Because that whole visual, they're looking away from each other, but they're slurping the noodle, and their heads are moving toward each other, but they don't know, and then they accidentally... It's adorable.
It is so cute.
It is very cute, but it is very cute in this is a fantasy movie where dogs can talk and read.
What? Yeah.
It's like, you just don't let real dogs have spaghetti. No. Although I do find it interesting that Walt Disney apparently didn't like that scene and didn't think they should bother with it. And so one of the animators actually went and did the entire thing himself and was like, here, this is it. It's actually going to be really cute. Like, look. And everybody loved it, including Disney. And so they went in and got in-betweeners to actually, because he made it move really fast because he was doing it by himself. So they got in-betweeners to make it a little longer, which I think helped.
Yes.
I find that anecdote interesting because... as a society, and especially people who love Disney, we've mythologized Walt Disney in a way of him being a genius who was a visionary, who knew what would work when no one else knew. And he saw things that no one else could see. And this is a very specific case where, like, that scene, I think it was on, like, AFI's Top 100 Most Romantic Moments list. It's the scene everyone remembers from this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And Walt Disney didn't think it belonged in it. And he didn't think it would work until someone proved him differently. Yes, the band was a visionary. Yes, he did a whole lot of things that for good or ill. Because actually, we can get into the business side of things a little bit. This is actually the first movie that was distributed under Buena Vista, which is a subsidiary that Walt Disney formed because RKO was being obnoxious about distributing his movies. And I don't remember which specific one it was, but at this point, he was making nature documentaries, which... we are not going to talk about Walt Disney's nature documentaries. But RKO was arguing about not wanting to release one of his movies, and he was like, fine, I'll do it myself. So they formed Buena Vista. A few years before this movie is the beginning of Walt Disney distributing their own films, which people who aren't in the business tend to not understand all of the different layers there are. It's very much all under a few umbrellas now. But, you'll have a production company. They're making the movies. They don't necessarily sell and distribute them to theaters.
Right.
That's a partnership that they make with someone else. That person sells and distributes it, takes a cut. They're both getting money. Disney themselves wasn't calling up the theaters to book their movies. And so this is a movie that's early on when they formed their own distribution company. That Buena Vista actually, it's distributing live action and animated films, and it starts distributing things that are not produced by Disney. And becomes like, there's a whole interesting history there. Because people don't realize it is Disney. Disney's doing things like that. He's doing business stuff that is, very capitalist.
Right.
But they're good business moves for him and his company. But he still isn't necessarily always 100% correct. He still has a team. He still has a group of people under him who are making these movies. He's not directing these films. He's producing them.
Right.
He has his hand in all of it. Everything's going through him. He's approving or not approving things, for sure. But this movie is directed by 3 people who are not Walt Disney. All of the animation design, the animation is done by people who are not Walt Disney.
Right. And can we just talk about the animation momentarily? I know you're making a point here.
No, I think I'm done. I think I'm just rambling.
Well, I mean, I think your point was that, like, it just goes to show that we put him on a pedestal, but here he is. He was wrong. That scene is excellent. He didn't like it. He was wrong.
Right.
But it also goes to show, like, what he could actually admit when he was wrong because it made it into the movie.
Yeah.
So there's that. So the animation, briefly. Again, I loved it. I love the soft color palettes that they do with these older movies. I love specifically, like, it's in color. I get that. But it's almost like it's kind of sepia-toned animation in a way. Especially when they're doing the outdoorsy stuff. I love, it starts out on, like, a Christmas night, basically. There you see carolers. It turns out, from this podcast, I have learned a lot of things. But about myself, I have learned this. I am a sucker for nighttime, winter nighttime animation. I love it. Their whole date, I like too, when they're in the park and you see the swans and you see, I mean, it's just so pretty. I like that really soft, purpley blue color palette that they use for all this stuff. Ingrid, actually, my daughter made the point, she watched it with me and she saw Darling and she goes, well, she looks like Wendy. And I was like, well, Wendy Darling. Get it? She's sort of animated to look like grown-up Wendy in a way. You see her and you're just like, I love that whole color palette. I like all the animation in this. And they did such a good job with the dogs. Like I saw in your notes that they did bring in the observed dogs as basically like live action models in order to get that animation. And again, it's one of those things where you can see they're just hitting it out of the park on that kind of thing. I don't normally pay attention to things like that. And so if I pick up on it, other than being like, oh, pretty, then that's saying something. I mean, I do pay attention to dogs. There's that.
One of the things that I noted was that, like, the backgrounds in this movie are stuffed. Apparently, originally, Mary Blair, who we've mentioned a few times, was going to do the backgrounds, and she did some concept art for this, but she left Disney before this was finished to become a children's book illustrator, apparently. They had a different background artist work on this, and he actually apparently made little model houses, and then shot film from low angles to see how it would look from a dog's point of view to get a better idea of, like, the perspective.
Yes.
Which I think shows very much. I think the perspective work in this is excellent. But he also just did this, the way the Darling's house is drawn. And actually, Darling is not their last name. Their last name's not known. The way their house is shown, it is decorated to the gills.
It's a fancy pants Victorian home, too. Like, it's got the gingerbread. I mean, like, I can buy it, though. You're not wrong. It's got rugs on top of rugs. But at the same time, I think it's actually probably accurate.
It is. It very much tells a story of who these people are in a way that's very, I think, works very well. And those backgrounds, even with them being so intricate, every detail is wonderfully done. It's not something where they like, oh, we've added like 80 perfume bottles on the shelf, so we're just going to like draw them real sloppy. They took care with every single tiny piece of those backgrounds in the house. I think that that is part of what adds to the romance of the movie. Not romance in the literal boy falling in love with girl romance. I think that that's what adds to it. Along with, like you said, the color palette is beautiful. Like, I mean, the colors they choose for this are wonderful. The way that they draw Jim Deere and Darling, which incidentally, they did have several drafts where they had names.
I thought this was so cute, though.
That's what they call each other, so that's the only names that Lady thinks they have.
I thought it was adorable. That was one of those things, like, I did come away from this movie firmly on the cold side of lukewarm, but there were a lot of things like that where I was like, well, of course that's what she would think their names were. It's kind of like we always used to joke that when I got our old dog Potato, Sean and I had already been together for quite a few years at that point. She was born the year we got married, and we had already been together for 6 years. But we would always joke that, in her opinion, she and I met, and I brought her home, and that day we met him.
Yeah.
And that was how, kind of, in my mind, her view of our relationship worked was that it was me and her, and then he came along. Potato was very possessive of me. So, anyway.
That gets a little into the fact that I actually... Okay, so you've got the scene where Lady's outside and she's upset, and Jock and Trusty come by and they're like, oh, you know, what's happening? And then they figure out that Darling must be pregnant. Which, of course, they throw in a line where Darling says, I just can't imagine anything taking her place in our hearts.
Oh, I know.
And I'm like, Darling, I don't know what the more heavy word for foreshadowing is. If normal foreshadowing is a tap on the shoulder, that was like a sledgehammer to the back of the head.
Yeah, it was pretty on the nose. You kind of know what's coming.
But as much as that scene she describes Jim Deere and Darling, like, Jim Deere's actually acting like kind of an ass. They've been ignoring her and everything, and they're preoccupied. But then, as soon as the baby is born, and you have that, like, kind of weird interlude where a lady is singing internally that song, What Is It, Baby?
That's a whole weird part.
It's such a sad song. But she goes up, she's trying to figure this out. And as soon as she walks into the room, Jim Deere and Darling are showing her the baby. They are like, look, here's our baby. She's part of our family now. Like, almost in the way you would, like, an older sibling.
Right.
I was actually pretty impressed by that. I thought it was a nice touch because, to me, it showed that, yeah, they were preoccupied at first, and, like, Lady was feeling ignored because she had them all to herself and everything, but they do love their dog.
Yes, I thought so, too. And, again, that was another area where I was like, man, this animation is breathtaking. That shot of the baby, where you kind of see him from the side, and you're looking over him and kind of at Lady, I was just like, well, Christ, it does not get prettier than that. I just thought it was wonderful.
And they really took their time with it. They really... You know, I was trying to make this, like, scale of animating animals where, like, Bambi's on one end and Dumbo's on the other.
Yeah.
It's way more towards the Bambi end of things.
Oh, totally.
These dogs are stylized. They are not fully realistically drawn dog, but they are still much, much more realistic than the animals in a lot of other, even in a lot of other Disney stuff.
Yeah.
They're not caricatures of these breeds. They're sort of extreme examples in the case of, like, let's say the Dachshund. They are exaggerating the Dachshund's features, but in a way that I feel like most Dachshund owners probably would appreciate.
Yeah. I mean, as a Dachshund person through and through, I can say yes.
When he poked his head out of the hole, I was like, Gretchen's going to enjoy that.
Yes. I mean, there's very little about Dachshunds I don't love. And yes, they're jerks. Honestly, Dachshunds are kind of a-holes. They're one of the number one biting dog breeds. The most reported breed of bites is Dachshunds. So, you know, with that said, do we want to talk about the dogs or the voices? Because I want to talk about both.
Revisiting the Vault is a 9-Hour Films production, and it's edited by Mary Ratliff. Our music is by Music Motion and Lynn Publishing. We are not affiliated with or authorized by the Walt Disney Company. You can find us on Twitter at Revisit the Vault, and you can find our website at revisitingthevault.com. Don't forget to check out our Patreon. Patrons can get personalized thank you cards, stickers, and access to deleted scenes and outtakes. You can find that over at patreon.com/9hourfilms. If you want to support us, the best thing you can do is to tell other people about the show, and make sure that you leave a review in whatever app you're using to listen. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.